This is the seventh part in a course on the foundations of optimal brain performance. And we're looking at how to resolve everyday problems like brain fog, fatigue, and mood problems using the framework of functional medicine, which looks to identify underlying weak points in body systems functioning and specific and individual places where we can target change to make the most difference. And this is the basis for creating personalized solutions and plans of action using diet and nutrition and lifestyle change. As we've seen throughout the course, the functional medicine model is based on analysis at three levels. Firstly, symptoms, things like anxiety and poor concentration, craving, weight gain. And then we use lab tests to ask questions about how well body systems are functioning or which systems are not functioning optimally, and so find out where we can make the most difference. And then we've got triggers and primary causes, which are often the best place to target interventions. Again, these are the main body systems relevant to everyday problems with brain performance. So the brain is depending on these systems to meet its needs, and problems in these systems are going to impact on the brain. In this unit, we're looking at the detoxification system, which does of course interact with other body systems, and especially the GI system, the gastrointestinal system, which we covered in the last part of the course. So what exactly is detoxification? Well, put simply, it's the removal from the body of substances that are harmful or would be harmful if they were allowed to accumulate. And that often involves some biochemical processing of toxicants first, converting them into less harmful substances, or at least ones that can be more easily excreted from the body via the usual routes of urine, feces, and also via the skin and sweating to some extent. Now, some detoxification is done in all the cells, so it's better to think in terms of the detoxification system rather than in terms of particular organs. But of course the liver is specialized and does much of the body's processing of toxicants. Detoxification is really quite a controversial topic, and you can read newspaper articles referring to it as some kind of myth. And there seems to be a view in mainstream medicine that detoxification just happens automatically in the body, and it really has nothing to do with the vast majority of illness, unless you happen to have a liver disease, of course, which is relatively rare. And at the other extreme, in the world of alternative health, you can hear about lots of different techniques that claim to be detox methods, or they claim to pull toxicants out of the body, with very little in the way of evidence that they actually do. The functional medicine perspective is that detoxification is a fundamental biological process that can get compromised or can work less optimally and may need some extra support. But at least for what you might call subclinical cases, therapy should be about supporting healthy body functioning rather than actively trying to pull out toxicants, which might end up doing more harm than good. And I think the functional medicine view of detoxification is expressed really well in this book by Dr. Geoffrey Bland, who's a highly respected biochemist and perhaps the key figure in the history of functional medicine. The book covers all the fundamental biological processes. Detoxification is just the subject of one chapter. So a few facts about detoxification and toxicity. We're exposed to more toxic substances now than at any point in the history of the human race, due to the nature of modern industrialized society and the everyday use of thousands of chemicals such as plastics and pesticides. Toxicants do get stored in the body, they do accumulate in the body, and especially in fat tissue, and you can find them when you do biopsies or autopsies. And more than that, these substances do have metabolic effects in the body. An example is the chemical BPA found in plastics and found to be linked to diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. Even very low levels of toxicants can have significant effects in the body, for example by disrupting hormonal control, and in fact this is the way that BPA does its damage. Detoxification processes require nutrients as raw materials. For example, amino acids, which come from protein in the diet, are needed for some of the chemical conversions. And not just nutrients, but energy. It's been estimated that in your resting state, the liver consumes about 29% of the body's energy, which is more than any other organ. The ability to detoxify is quite an individual thing. Clearly it depends on your diet and lifestyle factors, but also it depends on your genes. And this genetic variability of detoxification is actually well established by science, and it's an aspect of our biochemical individuality which our healthcare systems really need to take account of. So in short, what all that means is that there's a whole spectrum of detoxification functioning, ranging from optimal to outright illness, for example liver disease. By the way, it's worth a reminder that alcohol is toxic and it has to be processed by the liver, and if you consume enough, then you can damage your liver. You'll recognise this graphic, which I've adapted from the course introduction. It's making the point that there's this large grey region between health and disease, both in a general sense and with regard to detoxification function in particular. And if detoxification isn't working optimally, then the two systems that are most sensitive to problems are the brain and the immune system. So toxicity is very much relevant to the sort of problems that we're focusing on. So brain fog, fatigue, motivation problems, headaches, including migraines, mood problems, anxiety, and symptoms connected to inflammation such as joint pain or muscle pain. And you can find out more about the symptoms of toxicity problems by taking the client intake questionnaire on the website. Okay, so what are the toxicants that we're exposed to and that are causing these kind of problems? It's worth just noting as an aside that anything can be toxic if the dose is high enough, including water and including oxygen, and both of these can kill if the dose is high enough. But more relevantly, it's man-made chemicals that are in the environment, such as pesticides and herbicides, residues of which are found in food, or at least non-organic food. Also plastics and solvents, some of which are entirely new from a biological perspective, in that we haven't evolved the means of handling them. And also heavy metals such as mercury and lead, which aren't new, but are now found in much higher levels than ever before in human history, again because of the modern industrialized society that we live in. So for example, all the lead that used to be in petrol back in the 1970s and earlier, well, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's still in the environment. It's still in the dust by major roads. It's in the air. It gets into food and water. But there are also toxic substances produced within the body, usually as waste materials, like ammonia, for example, which comes from protein metabolism and is excreted through urine as urea. But even functional molecules, such as the hormone estrogen, needs to be processed and cleared from the body, otherwise it builds up and causes harm. Biotoxins are produced by organisms, for example toxins from mold or fungus, which can be found in food. But also plants can produce toxins as a defense against being eaten, and even plants that are normally part of our diet. Lastly, toxins can be produced by unhealthy microorganisms living in the gut, and we can then absorb these. So I've said that toxic substances are naturally produced within the body, and I want to come back to a topic that first came up in Unit 1 on cellular energy production, and that is free radicals, which you can think of as the body's exhaust fumes. They're highly reactive chemically and can cause damage at the molecular level by reacting with things like fats and proteins and even DNA. Free radicals also come from outside the body. So if you smoke or if you breathe in fumes from vehicle exhausts, you're taking in a lot of free radicals that can do some damage. Another internal source is inflammation. That's a topic we'll come back to in the next part of the course. So all cells create some free radicals, and we have to mop them up to prevent them doing this damage. And that's the job of our antioxidant defenses. Now, it may be that your antioxidant defenses are struggling to cope with all the free radicals that you're exposed to, and that situation is called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress can involve a vicious cycle, So your antioxidants are used up, so to speak, in the process of detoxifying free radicals. So the more free radicals you have, the more you deplete your defenses, and the more damage can happen, and the more free radicals you create, and so on. So oxidative stress is actually a really fundamental process that's a mechanism in all chronic disease and even the process of aging. So let's talk about antioxidants. The most important by far are made within the body, and there are two classes. The first group are enzymes, not to be confused with digestive enzymes. These ones are found throughout the body. And the second class include these: glutathione, that's probably the single most important in the class. Also coenzyme Q10, which we met in Unit 1. We also get antioxidants from food, and there are a huge number of substances that can act as antioxidants, some stronger than others. The best known ones are probably the vitamins C, E and A. So when an antioxidant molecule neutralizes a free radical, it becomes spent in a sense, and that means it gets chemically converted to its oxidized form. It can then be recycled back to a useful antioxidant or back to its reduced form, often by other antioxidants. And that's part of the reason that we need so many. The antioxidants work as a big team. Now, you sometimes hear that some minerals are referred to as antioxidants, and especially zinc and selenium, but they aren't directly antioxidants in themselves, but rather they're needed as supports for some of the antioxidant enzymes. Let's look at what might be happening when the detoxification systems aren't working optimally. I think the key point here is that there doesn't need to be anything broken. You don't need to have a liver disease before you can get into problems. The liver's ability to process toxicants is a limited resource, and it takes time, and problems come up when there's a pressure on that resource. So analogy might be helpful. Let's consider an immigration control at the airport. So you've got a limited number of officers who check people's passports, and it takes some time for the passengers to get through. Now, what happens if several flights arrive at once? Well, you start to get congestion, long queues backing up. Or again, if several of the staff members got ill on the same day and they didn't turn up to work, then the same thing happens. You get passenger congestion and passengers having to wait a long time. So something like that can happen with the detoxification systems. An extra burden of toxicants to process, or a lack of resources needed to do the processing, causes problems in the form of toxicants backing up in the body. It's not that detoxification isn't working, it's just not coping with the demand. So what can happen that would raise the toxic burden? Well, I think the key thing is trouble in the gastrointestinal tract. We looked at this in the last unit of the course. We talked about how increased permeability and also gut dysbiosis, or unhealthy microorganisms living in the gut, can increase the toxic burden. And then constipation, or more specifically slow transit time. This is a problem because toxins have got more time to get absorbed and even reabsorbed. So the liver excretes some toxic material into the gut via the bile, and it may actually come back into the body further down in the digestive tract. And immune system reactivity. If you've got inflammation going on in the body, it's going to create a certain amount of collateral damage, so to speak. Or the capacity of the detoxification system can be reduced if it lacks nutrient raw materials that it needs, such as antioxidants and amino acids, because of poor diet. Another factor is excessive sugar intake, which we looked at in part 3 of the course. High levels of sugar can cause a kind of damage called glycation, and the result of glycation is a big increase in free radical production. So if you do have problems with toxicity or increased toxic burden, what should you do? I think the key point is to support the body's natural detoxification processes. It's only in the most serious cases that you have to think about actively pulling toxicants out of the body. And that's something of a risky thing to do anyway, best considered a medical procedure. Of course, you can take steps to limit further toxic exposure. So if you smoke or drink a lot of alcohol, for example, then that's an obvious place to start. And there are smaller ways. For example, you can filter your tap water or move to organic foods. But really the major part of reducing exposure is probably to make sure that you have a healthy gut and address any problems that you may have with gut permeability or with dysbiosis. I would guess that the majority of cases of toxicity issues are contingent upon gut health problems. So again, just to re-emphasize the importance of checking out gut health with functional testing. You can make sure the detoxification system has all the nutrient raw materials it needs, and especially by eating a healthy diet with lots of vegetables and good protein. But it can be very useful to supplement specific nutrients for extra support. Probably the most powerful nutrients are ones that induce increased production of the body's internal antioxidants. And an example of that is curcumin, which is contained in the spice turmeric. It works by switching on the genes for the antioxidants. Now, I mentioned earlier the heavy metals, and I want to say a little bit more about them now. So the likes of mercury, lead, arsenic, etc. are amongst the most toxic substances known. And their effects are most noticeable in terms of brain function. So they're linked to disorders like depression and ADHD and Alzheimer's, even if they're rarely the cause of these disorders, or even the predominant cause. The point is, any amount of these metals is going to have negative consequences in the brain, and any safe limit is really just arbitrary. And even relatively low levels can be connected to the sort of problems we're talking about, like brain fog and fatigue and anxiety. We're all exposed to heavy metals to some degree. They're in foods and water, but what matters, what seems to matter, is how well you can defend against them, or in other words, how well you can block them from being absorbed into the body through the gut. And also, then once they're in the body, how well can you get them out again? Zinc is critically important to our defense against toxic metals. Now, besides its role in detoxification, zinc has many other functions in the body, too many to list really, but it's particularly important for brain health. And I would say that for our purposes, when we're looking for weak points in body system functioning that underlie problems like brain fog and depression, etc., it's one of the most important factors to assess. So that is, your zinc status is one of the most important things to check out, because zinc deficiency is common, and if you are deficient, it's likely going to show up as fatigue and poor brain function. But in terms of heavy metal defense, zinc is needed to build a protein called metallothionein that has the capacity to bind toxic metals. So you can find metallothionein in the lining of a healthy gut, where it blocks the toxic metals from getting absorbed into the body. But you can also find it throughout the body, and it's important in excreting heavy metals that do get into the body. So again, if you're zinc deficient, you may not be able to make enough metallothionein, and you may end up building up problems with heavy metals. Having touched on zinc, we need to have a look at copper as well, which, like zinc, is an essential nutrient, but one that carries certain liabilities with it, because copper is also pro-oxidant, meaning that it contributes to oxidative stress, and so it needs to be managed quite carefully by the body. And that means that it's normally found in the body in a bound form, or bound to proteins, which essentially stop it from causing this oxidative damage that would happen if it were left free. And one of the proteins that can manage copper is metallothionein, which we've just heard about. So again, zinc status is really important to the management of copper. And this is the basis of how copper and zinc work together as partners in the body. For some people, it seems that copper can build up to high levels. For some reason, they don't manage it very well. And copper toxicity results in brain health problems, most notably anxiety, emotional volatility, but also fatigue. So again, checking out your copper status is one of the most important things to do in the functional assessment of brain health problems. And there's a good chance that if you are copper toxic, it's linked to zinc deficiency. It might also be worth mentioning that postpartum depression has also been linked to copper and zinc balance. Copper builds up during pregnancy because it's needed for the developing embryo, but after birth, the mother can be left with an excess of copper that's hard to rebalance. Pirole disorder is a particular form of zinc imbalance. It's a biochemical condition where the body loses zinc and vitamin B6 through urine. And it can lead to quite severe deficiencies in both of these, which are of course important brain nutrients. And so Pirole disorder is characterized most often by severe anxiety or tension. Now you can compensate by supplementing these nutrients, zinc and B6. Sometimes quite large amounts are needed, so it can be worthwhile just to test for the condition, Pirole disorder, with a simple and low-cost urine test. Let's talk about detoxification testing more generally. Now, it would be nice if there were a simple test of how well the detoxification systems were coping, but there really isn't a single such test. Instead, there are lots of different tests, and there are two types. Firstly, ones that look at levels of the toxicants, and secondly, those that look at the defences. So, hair mineral analysis we've met earlier in the course, and it includes a look at the heavy metals, lead and mercury and so on, as they appear in hair. Now, it's by no means a foolproof test of heavy metals, because it only sees what's coming out in hair, and there may be hidden deposits of heavy metals in the body that are causing problems, and especially in the brain. But it does give you an indication of zinc and copper status, again not perfect. I would say the value of this test is its generality. It gives you an overall picture of health for quite a low cost, but its weakness is its uncertainty really. Some other tests. You can look at liver enzymes, and in particular two called ALT and AST. Now, doctors often look at these in their blood testing, and it's more of a medical test really. It's looking for liver pathology more than simply increased toxic load, which is what we're interested in. You can check out the levels of lots of the different antioxidants, including antioxidant enzymes, glutathione, which I mentioned earlier as being the most important of the non-enzyme ones, and also coenzyme Q10. And you can test for the level of damage done by free radicals. So for example, lipid peroxides are fats that have been damaged, and high levels suggest oxidative stress. In many cases, it might be a better use of resources to ask why the body is under toxic stress. In other words, to look for more primary causes, and especially gut health problems. Now, one primary cause might be zinc deficiency. So I just want to make a quick mention of a test that you can do at home, the zinc taste test. Now what you do here is you take a mouthful of zinc solution, which you can buy, and you hold it there and you wait for the taste response. You know what it tastes like. Zinc is actually needed for the sense of taste. So if the solution just tastes like water, then it points to zinc deficiency, while a strong immediate taste suggests that you're okay in terms of zinc. But usually the result is somewhere in between, suggesting a mild deficiency. Now, it's not a perfect test, it's not foolproof as a test of zinc status, but it is useful and it's pretty low cost. Let's finish the presentation by summarizing what we've covered. Detoxification is the processing and removal of harmful and waste substances from the body. And there's a spectrum of detoxification functioning ranging from optimal to outright illness, with a grey region in the middle where the system is not actually damaged, but it's struggling to meet the demand. We've looked at oxidative stress and the need for antioxidant defences. And we've talked about copper and zinc and their importance to brain health. And in fact, copper and zinc balance is one of the most important areas to check out when you have brain health issues. And in most cases, the best strategy is to support detoxification by meeting the system's needs rather than doing anything more active than that. And that means supplying the range of nutrients needed as raw materials, including antioxidants, primarily through a healthy diet, but also with supplementation. It's important to keep blood sugar well regulated and so limit glycation, which is a source of oxidative stress. And it's also important to support gastrointestinal health, because raised gut permeability, dysbiosis, and inflammatory imbalance that can result are the primary factors in increasing the toxic burden on the liver and the detoxification systems. Now, we've mentioned inflammation quite a lot throughout the course, and indeed it's one of the most significant mechanisms behind chronic illness. So in the final part of the course, we'll turn our attention to the immune system and the inflammation response.